Welcome to A Growing Concern. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about something called Vietnam Friendship Village. We're going to discuss this with my guest, Becky Looning. She's involved with that. It's a national organization, and part of it's in the United States as well. So we're going to talk about it a while, and we've got a couple video documentaries, excerpts from video documentaries that are extremely well done that can also say a lot about what we're talking about, as well as we can here in the studio. So we'll do them both. So Vietnam Friendship Village, it's a great title. What does all that mean?
The Vietnam Friendship Village is a specific village that's located in Hanoi, Vietnam. And over there, Friendship Village is kind of a generic term. There are multiple friendship villages and peace villages that usually mean that someone from outside Vietnam is coming and having a peaceful, friendly relationship with Vietnamese partners to do something good for the country. Mm-hmm. And this specific village was founded by an American veteran named George Miso. He fought in the American War in Vietnam. He had a very intense time over there, was wounded and sent home, turned against the war. And then after years of fighting, first fighting in Vietnam, and then fighting his government around their foreign policies, not just during the Vietnam War, but later in the 80s, during the wars in Central America. He finally had this kind of
epiphany,
yeah. I guess you could call it, where he wanted to do something positive, something that would be more that would create hope and healing, and feeling that he could do some good in the world. So he went to Vietnam and established some relationships over there with actually the people he had once fought against, the veterans.
Because Hanoi is in what was then
the Vietnamese
North
veterans.
Vietnamese.
Right.
Yeah.
They would have been during the war called North Vietnamese. So they created this place called the Vietnam Friendship Village. It's in a area of Hanoi called Van Can. I think that's the commune name. And then it's now part of greater Hanoi city, because Hanoi has continued to just expand over the years.
It's a large city.
Then, yeah, so Hanoi has expanded, so this village is now considered to be within the boundaries of Hanoi. It's about 11 kilometers southwest of the city center, and they house and provide care and education for about 120 children at a time, and currently 60 veterans cycle through there and spend a month and a half at a time getting services, medical services mostly. But the children and some of the veterans are victims of Agent Orange. So their parents or grandparents were exposed during the war. There are genetic problems that were caused. A lot of children born with different types of deformities or malformation of their skeletal system or other muscular problems, sometimes other developmental problems. And this village creates, they provide physical therapy, medical care, good nutrition, as well as regular education and vocational education. And it's really quite a place. It's kind of a showcase too. There's hundreds of visitors that come through there every year from hundreds of countries. So it's a place where people come and they learn about Agent Orange, but they also learn about the beauty of people getting together and making a difference in people's lives. It
struck me when you said children whose parents and grandparents. So what we're talking about is their grandparents were hit with this Agent Orange 50 years ago or something like that, and it's passed through to their grandchildren?
Yeah, or it hasn't been that long, but during the war, the wartime, so the war ended, the spraying of Agent Orange, of which the toxic component is dioxin. Dioxin is the thing that has stayed in the soil.
Right.
And is still, there are hot spots in Vietnam that exist around places where it was sprayed intensively or where it was spilled. Usually the hot spots are around old U.S. military bases where a lot of chemical was spilled or offloaded.
Well, that's what I'm wondering about. So it wasn't that they were contaminated during the war. The hot spots are there, and folks are becoming contaminated with it now, and their children are suffering from that.
Yeah, well, there's two things. There's the environmental contamination, which is still affecting people who live in those areas.
Right.
And then there's a genetic contamination where most of the people that fought in the war on the Vietnamese side fought for much longer than the U.S. service people that were flown over there and spent, 6 months or a year in country.
Right.
Some of them, of course, did multiple duty. And just as a side note, I mean, not a side note, but anybody who's familiar with that war knows that a lot of American veterans came home with medical problems and gave birth to children that had birth defects. I think the VA has a list of 14 different kinds of illnesses or conditions that either the veteran or the veteran's offspring, if they show up with that condition, they're presumed to be caused by Agent Orange, and they can get some sort of allowance from the VA for that. And
some of the children die as well. It isn't just a lifelong debilitating disease or whatever it would be. It takes these children's lives as well.
It can, yeah. And there's all different levels. Some people have very minor birth defects, and some have really debilitating illnesses, and like you say, some never survive, some never get born, they have stillbirths, and a lot of it you couldn't necessarily prove. Like I said, the VA has this list where they presume. In Vietnam, they say there's millions of victims, and a lot of that is just, anecdotally they can say, my father, grandfather, we know was exposed because they were fighting along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That's where a lot of the spraying was done, because they were defoliating the trees that were covering the movement of these Viet Cong along the trail, in the south. Most of the spraying was done south of the DMZ. That's another thing that people, when you stop to think about it, this is supposedly a civil war between North and South. Well, we were on the side of this South Vietnam, supposedly, but we were doing all this spraying all over the countryside in the South.
I didn't know that. Of course, that's where the invasions were, coming from the north into the south, so that they would do that. And we've all been raised to understand and to hear about Agent Orange, but there's a lot of facts of it that I never thought about. That yes, our soldiers were definitely hit with this stuff, but they came home afterwards, and they didn't have any of it hitting them over here. Whereas there's hot spots and there's genetic damage that's going on over there that is ongoing. It's like a radioactivity in that respect, where it's an ongoing. It's a crime against the generations rather than a crime against just the individual people that are there at the time. And that to me is just, it compounds the crime, the war crime that we perpetrated on those people.
Yeah, it is really true. It's a current issue still after all these years. It's really unfortunate. There's finally, and this is something that the U.S. government and, the U.S. public just hasn't known about because nobody wants to talk about it. But recently there's been a little bit of movement where the government is coming forward. They gave a grant, I think in 2004, for like $400,000 to begin doing some cleanup around the old military base in Da Nang. I'm not sure whether that's already been done, or whether more money has been given. But there's starting to be a little bit of opening to be able to talk about it publicly. There's actually the Ford Foundation is giving money for different social networking projects to help organizations like ours that are helping victims of Agent Orange. And they're not supporting the people. There's also campaign, there's people friends of mine who are approaching this problem from a legislative level, trying to get the government and the chemical companies that are really responsible for it to take responsibility and do something.
It was Monsanto, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, there were actually 7 chemical companies
was
involved. Yeah, Monsanto was a big player. Yeah, so that's a whole nother.
Right. I understand that. Well,
But just so people know, there is a I'll just mention the name of it. There is a bill in Congress that was sponsored by a Bay Area, a California congressman named Bob Filner. It's H.R. 2634. It's called the Victims of Agent Orange Relief Act of 2011. I believe it's still in committee, and they don't expect it to pass, but it's a good educational tool. And what's nice about this act is it not only would take care of the victims in Vietnam, but also children of U.S. veterans and Vietnamese Americans. So.
yeah, we'll have to get that graphic made up, and we'll mention that again later in the show, so we make sure that folks can get on board with that. It's got some co-sponsors, but it's not large enough to be able to get it out of committee. Probably is what's going on.
Yeah, I'm not really versed in where it's at right now and who is supporting it in Congress. Congress is it's been one of the, like I say, one of those issues that our government doesn't want to deal with.
Well, it took them 20 years to even give any relief to their own veterans, as I recall.
Right, and they weren't. They would have. That would have never happened had not this Admiral Zumwalt had his own son was really exposed. He was swimming in the canals where some of this
the runoff
was happening, and he came down with some sort of really intense cancer, you know, and so his father wanted to get to the bottom of it, and it kind of forced the Pentagon to deal with it.
That's generally what it takes.
Yeah.
Well, all right. We've been at this for a little while now. We've kind of given a little bit of an introduction. We've got a video. It's an, a half an hour video or so. We'll play 15 minutes of it. It's going to be hard to pull out of it once we get into it.
Yeah.
But we'll play some of this, and you'll be able to be more visual about some of the things we're talking about. And we'll come back and continue our conversation. And then we have a little more video after that. So we'll be back in a little while.
This is a story about heroes and friendship, and the new ties linking once bitter enemies.
It's an incredible, unique story because veterans who fought in Vietnam or were connected to the wars in Vietnam were now building something very unique and very positive, life-affirming, to help heal the worst victims of the war, namely the children who had Agent Orange damage.
Friendship Village. American veterans and Vietnamese veterans together. And yeah, it's a good idea.
Shaped like an elongated S, Vietnam stretches for 1,000 miles along the length of the Indo-Chinese peninsula, and covers an area roughly the size of New Mexico. China lies to the north, Laos, Thailand, and Cambodia to the west, and the South China Sea to the east. This is Hanoi City, the People's Republic of Vietnam. The capital of North Vietnam, and once the stronghold of a people we called the enemy. From Kennedy to Nixon, and from Tet to the Round Table, now almost 30 years later, a great deal has changed. Today it looks as though there never was a war. No napalm, no arclight, no DMZ. For the new generation of Vietnamese, the war with America is ancient history. Half the population was born after it ended. There are some signs of the war that happened here, but these relics are little more than a passing curiosity. Here in the Hanoi market, life goes on very much as it always has. The same foods are being bartered, the same language spoken, and the only difference between now and then is the age of the war veterans. Spiritual life is evident throughout Vietnamese society and culture. Buddhism, Confucianism, and Christianity are among the many faiths practiced here. The children here are just like children everywhere else in the world. They play in the streets, pile onto each other's bicycles, and generally act as if the world was designed for their pleasure. But not all of the children of Hanoi live in happiness. When you leave downtown, the sounds of laughing children fade quickly. Here, almost lost from world view, is the Vietnam Friendship Village project. At first glance, this appears to be an ordinary boarding school. But when you look closer, it's clear that these are not ordinary kids. These children suffer the legacy of a war they know nothing about. Evidence suggests that they are the victims of Agent Orange and other biochemicals used by the United States military. It was called Agent Orange because it was shipped to Vietnam in 55-gallon drums, marked with an orange stripe. It was the principal defoliant used in what the Pentagon called Operation Ranch Hand. Since the enemy hid under the jungle canopy, one way to force him into the open was to make the jungles disappear. 19 million gallons of chemical defoliants were sprayed over the densely forested jungles of South Vietnam.
It's just not one place that you can say, well, they dropped Agent Orange. No, they dropped Agent Orange all over the country.
Bob Moore was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division when he arrived in Vietnam just before Christmas in 1965. He eventually served 3 combat tours in Vietnam.
Well, it was all over Vietnam. You get off the coastal plains and you get over into the little hills that run north and south. They dropped it there. Now you get over in Triple Canopy, which is further west, they dropped it there.
Okay, the next target is another guerrilla camp.
Vietnamese soldiers and civilians alike were showered with Agent Orange. Then they lived, worked, and breathed amid the residue of an especially poisonous chemical called dioxin. An unavoidable byproduct of Agent Orange, dioxin was once described as the most toxic molecule ever synthesized by man. It infiltrated the country's water and soil, entered the food chain, and then accumulated in people's tissues. Then, in 1969, researchers discovered that dioxin caused birth defects in laboratory animals. In December 1970, President Richard Nixon announced a halt to the use of Agent Orange in Vietnam. While scientists continue to study the link between dioxin and birth defects, one thing is known. According to a recent study published in a U.S. congressional report, dioxin levels in people who lived in sprayed areas of South Vietnam were 10 times higher than in people living in the north. Now, more than a quarter century since the end of the war, another battle is being fought. This time by the children. But they are not fighting alone. The children of Friendship Village have some rather heroic allies.
Getting healthy again.
Some of the same men who spent time fighting the war in Vietnam are returning to help rebuild it. One child at a time.
I don't talk Vietnamese.
These veterans come from Korea, Australia, and Vietnam. From Alaska, Missouri, and New York. They are drawn together to help the most needy of a nation they once left in ruins. These former enemies have started down the path to healing, and Friendship Village is the first step on their journey.
Peace and reconciliation. We don't have to have war. We don't have to kill people. There are other ways. The killing is easy. It's the not killing that's difficult.
Sewell Jones was a Marine infantryman fighting near the border of North Vietnam in 1968. That area saw some of the heaviest fighting of the war. 35 years later, Sewell Jones is back in Vietnam.
I was startled. I was so amazed at how much had been done, that one person could take the initiative and create something as beautiful as the Friendship Village. It changed my thoughts about what can be done.
Friendship Village was born from the dream of an American combat veteran named George Mizo. In January of 1968, he became the sole survivor of an assault that killed his entire platoon. From that moment on, George's life was no longer about war, but about peace and reconciliation. In 1986, he returned to the country where he had battled 2 decades earlier. His visit to Vietnam provided the inspiration for Friendship Village, a place that would help heal the wounds of war between the United States and Vietnam.
He was the first American vet to go back to Vietnam, which is pretty awesome in itself in 1986. Now, George Mizo was one of my closest friends, the first Vietnam vet friend that I made after the war, back in New Jersey, 25 years ago. He was an activist and an extraordinary warrior for peace in America, in Europe, and even in Nicaragua. The unique thing about George was that he was a highly decorated Vietnam combat vet. And he made connections with the veterans in the Vietnamese army. And both groups wanted to do something for the sake of friendship and peace as Vietnam was trying to get over the disaster of decades of war. And George had a concept of forming this Friendship Village.
With his wife Rosie and son Michael at his side, George Mizo would spend the next 5 years negotiating with the Vietnamese government, while gathering support from veterans groups around the world. His dream was finally realized in October of 1998 with the official dedication of Friendship Village. This collection of buildings on the outskirts of Hanoi has become a home away from home for survivors of the war, both young and old. They are here to receive treatment, education, and support. The village cares for up to 70 children and 30 veterans at a time. Children may stay here for up to 2 years or until the age of 14. Veterans stay up to 1 year. They too receive treatment for a wide variety of illnesses. The Friendship Village has become almost entirely self-sufficient. The fish pond provides a renewable source of nutrition. The village grows its own fruit, vegetables, rice, and medicinal herbs. Chickens and pigs are raised on the village farm. Children are able to participate in raising the livestock, planting and tending the garden, and preparing food. At the on-site clinic, children are treated for spina bifida, Down syndrome, cancers, and immunodeficiency-related illnesses. These diseases are among those commonly associated with Agent Orange exposure.
This is a function of the immune system.
The clinic has become an international center for research, drawing the attention of specialized doctors from around the world.
Environment, but also to the human being.
Here in a primary classroom, a dozen children are learning. Their disabilities range from mild retardation to severe physical deformity. But this doesn't prevent them from reaching their full potential. Most of these kids come from families unable to care for their special needs.
It's amazing what happens. They can join together with other kids who have the same problems, and they can live with them and have a normal schooling. Otherwise, they would not. They would stay away from school, or they'd be, very much isolated. But here, it's like going to a special school. They have their own dormitories, they have a staff that takes care of them, and they'll go to classrooms and have regular mathematics and reading lessons, and they really advance rather than remain in the villages kind of isolated and unconnected. They become really well-schooled and involved with social learning with other kids. And that's the beauty of Friendship Village.
A wide range of activities are made available to all of the children, including athletics, singing, and vocational training. These kids are making silk flowers. Children improve their dexterity while learning a craft that will help them survive as young adults. More than 200 children have graduated from Friendship Village since 1998. Some continue on to higher education or advanced vocational training. All children graduate with skills that will improve their quality of life. The 21-member staff includes doctors, nurses, teachers, and physical therapists. The project is funded entirely by donations. Contributors include the United States, England, France, Germany, and Japan. It is this international cooperation that makes Friendship Village possible.
People from Alaska did some fundraising, and we raised, $3,000, $3,500 all told. We donated it, we sent it back, and they built a fish farm that feeds the entire village, just with that $3,000. That one little...
All right, we're back.
Okay.
That goes on and on for quite some time. It's a 28-minute piece called Friendship Village, a Place of Healing, running time 28 minutes. Before we went into that, Becky mentioned a bill, so we got that graphic. We'll put that graphic up here a little bit, and there's the Village Friendship, and there's the vn-agentorange.org, and hopefully that's all still up to date. This is a 2003 video, and some of the information may have changed, but you get a pretty good idea of what's going on over there and the damage that we've caused to those people, as well as to our own soldiers. And just parenthetically, I might mention that it didn't end in Vietnam. We've done the same thing with something called depleted uranium in Iraq, and I think even in Bosnia, and probably also in Afghanistan, where depleted uranium it's not depleted at all. It's very low level, radioactivity, but it has caused a lot of damage, and somewhat the same damage, only through radioactivity rather than through the dioxins. So we should move along a little bit. You were watching that, and you've seen it before. Well, what direction do you want to go to?
I just wanted to say, at the tail end, he was talking about raising money in Alaska, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of our organization, because basically my role is I'm on what we call the U.S. Committee, also known as Vietnam Friendship Village Project USA.
USA, right.
And we are a very small nonprofit, all volunteer. Our board members, we have 9 board members currently. We're scattered around the country, a lot of us actually on the West Coast. And we basically, our role is to raise money in the United States to help support the Friendship Village in Vietnam. And this is an international project, as you mentioned, so as well as a committee in the United States, there is a volunteer committee in Japan, in Germany, in France, and Canada. And we all work together. We come together in Vietnam every 2 years for a biennial meeting at which we talk with our Vietnamese partners about what's been accomplished and then what they want to do, you know, in the future. And then we all go back home to our home countries and try to raise money to help support whatever the goals are for those the next coming years.
So this Friendship Village, Vietnam Friendship Village, is just basically one location where all this work is being done in Hanoi or whatever.
Right, that's what this project is about, yeah.
And it seems
like I said, but I'd also like to mention that this idea of reconciliation between U.S. veterans and Vietnamese is really a lot of veterans have gone back and done good work over there and created projects, and a lot of them, there's very small ones, very large ones, and there's just a lot of really good work being done through, you know, via people's real need to make peace and to reconcile, you know, the feelings that they had after that. I think a lot of people came home just with horrific memories and maybe some feelings of guilt or something, remorse, and so this is one way for, it's like therapeutic for them to go back and try to help people. So if you go to our website, vietnamfriendship.org, there's actually under our links page, you'll see a whole list of organizations, a lot of which were initiated by American veterans of that war.
Well, I don't want to get off the subject exactly, but you know, we're involved in 2 wars right now, and I think that I've read that there's been more soldiers that have been to Afghanistan and Iraq that have committed suicide than have actually been killed in combat over there. And so, you know, that is for some future reconciliation, quite possibly. But that says a lot for the heart and the soul and the spirit of these soldiers. They can go over there and see what they've seen and done what they've done, and then find their way back to trying to repair the damage in any way they can.
Yeah,
and to me that is incredible.
I have no doubt that there will be another generation of veterans from these wars in the Middle East who will do the same thing. And in fact, I think that's already happening. I've heard of an orphanage in Afghanistan, and you know, the Iraq Water Project, which was started by veterans, and there's things like that already in the works. But it's unfortunate. What's unfortunate is that we as a people, as a civilization, you know, and I can say worldwide, you know, not just the United States, but especially the United States, we did not learn the lessons of Vietnam that I would have hoped we would have learned, you know, that war is stupid and futile and unnecessary, and then it just hurts a lot of people.
But it's very lucrative.
Right, and as long as there's profits to be made, we will make war. That's really, you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a profit machine, whether it's healthcare, education, or whatever, you know, and that seems to be the direction that this what would you call it, predatory or rogue capitalistic state that we live in is going down that road. I mean, it isn't capitalism per se. Some people would argue that point, so I'll make that disclaimer. But at the same time, it's all about profit, and the profits made by, would you say, 7 companies? I always thought it was just Monsanto and Dow, but apparently there was a lot of other folks.
There were some smaller companies too
that made
that
a
were
lot
in
of
on
money
it.
off that, and they were mixing that, as you said. I didn't know that. I thought they were just mixing it at such strong dilutions that it was 10 times as powerful as it was being used in this country for the same reasons.
No, it wasn't. That wasn't actually intentional, but it was something that was discovered later. What happened was they wanted to spray so much of the stuff that they were putting pressure on the chemical companies to produce it quickly.
Faster. I'd never heard that.
Yeah, and it was the process of having to do it faster. I don't remember the science, you know, whether it was the temperature or a time factor, but that's why it was as stronger, more lethal.
It amounts to chemical warfare. In any event, however that happened, you know, they only had to use it once to realize that. Maybe the soldiers didn't realize, but somebody must have realized that this stuff is killing much more than it should. Basically, Agent Orange was 2,4-D, which killed broadleaf weeds and trees and things, and then the 2,4,5-T killed like grasses and things that the broadleaf killer wouldn't kill. And 2,4,5-T has long since been pulled from the market, but you can go under into Fred Meyer's right now and buy 2,4-D. It's called Weed Be Gone.
Oh, good. I'll go get some tomorrow.
Yeah, pass it around.
And my understanding was that it was the combination of those two things that created the dioxin. Is that right? It was like dioxin was a byproduct.
Byproduct, yeah. I think part of it, there was a byproduct of making it, but I think also that when it got into the ground, it deteriorated and went into dioxins as well. I'm not positive about that, but I know the dioxins were created in the beginning, and I think at the end of that too as well. And like it said, the most dangerous or lethal chemical that's ever been synthesized.
Right. Yeah. I know, and some of the pictures you see coming out of Vietnam are just horrific. You know, people with these big skin lesions or incredible deformities
like that
to their
one
faces,
young girl, yeah.
Or limbs that are just completely twisted. At the Vietnam Friendship Village that I'm involved with, we don't actually deal with the most severe cases of disabilities, but we do help quite a few people with other, you know, say someone is born with a foot that's like twisted all the way around, or a hand or an arm that somehow you know, just makes it really hard to use. You can do some corrective surgeries to help people become functional, you know, to walk again, and to use their hands. And so we've helped quite a few people in that way. And I just feel for these families that have given birth to children who basically never progress beyond a baby's mentality, and you know, often they'll just lay on a bed in the home and the parents will feed them, or you know, they've also seen some mental illnesses that are somehow presumed to be caused by Agent Orange, and it's really quite an epidemic over there.
And it's extremely important work that needs to be done, but it's even more important that we're the ones over there doing it. And I don't know. I know that there's a more than one country that's in Iraq and Afghanistan. Was that the same over there? I don't remember. Were there other countries involved with that in Vietnam?
Yeah, Australia was involved.
I remember Australia, yeah.
And Korea, I believe. And I'm not sure. Well, of course, France had a long history before we did.
Yeah, they got smart and got out.
One of our strongest partners in this project has been a French veterans group from the Paris area, and they're wonderful. I've gotten so much out of this project. My life has really been enhanced. I mean, I've been able to make friends with these people from other countries, that we all have this kind of peace-oriented thing in common, you know, and it's I've gotten to travel to Vietnam 4 times. I pay out of my own pocket, but being able to meet with all those partners and you know, see the newest improvements at the Friendship Village, and also tour the country a little bit and learn a little bit more about the culture. It's just been a fantastic opportunity for me.
Well, people, you know, viewers out there should keep in mind that, you know, as screwed up as governments are that create these wars and go after the greed and all that, it seems like it's the people who suffer, but then at the same time, it's the people who are moving forward and trying to repair this damage. And it'd be great if the government, you know, this bill would pass. But in lieu of any of that happening, it's great that people from all over the country are stepping up to the plate and trying to repair the damage. And we have another little clip that we're going to go into now that's going to do, I think it's going to get into some more of the actual science of the dioxins and what they're finding over there in some of these hot spots. And we'll play a little bit of it and come back because we're down to 17 minutes here already. Goes quick.
Their children.
Chúng tôi luôn luôn nhận thức rằng người Mỹ là có 2 lớp người khác nhau. Một lớp người là đại đa số nhân dân Mỹ là tốt, là những người bạn của chúng tôi. Chúng tôi nhớ luôn hình ảnh của hàng trăm, hàng chục ngàn người Mỹ biểu tình. Chỉ có một thiểu số là đại biểu cho những cái công ty độc quyền về vũ khí, đó là những người ham muốn chiến tranh xâm lược.
More bombs were dropped over Vietnam and neighboring Laos and Cambodia than all of Europe during World War II. Unexploded bombs and landmines still litter the Vietnamese countryside, killing and maiming over 2,000 people each year. But the war's most insidious legacy lives on in the soil. To uncover the enemy, the American military sprayed more than 72 million liters of the herbicide Agent Orange over Vietnam's jungles.
We had no idea when we were in Vietnam what they were spraying. I was told it was a mosquito spray, you know, harmless, don't worry about it.
Today, vast areas of South Vietnam remain contaminated with dioxin, a component of the defoliant and one of the deadliest chemicals known to mankind.
Và cái chất thứ hai là cái chất trắng. Cái diện tích mà chất độc hóa học phủ xuống miền Nam Việt Nam là 2.924.934 hectare.
An American soldier like myself, I was here from about mid-68 till June of 69. I was actually sprayed. I used to see the planes flying over. We used to drink the water, and it would be in the water. But I was only here for a year. A lot of these soldiers were here. They were sprayed for 10 years. But still, there's a lot of American veterans, a lot of Australian and Korean veterans who have physical problems and their children have problems. So I've had no physical problem I know of, but my wife had 2 miscarriages. So, that Agent Orange, we don't know.
In the areas sprayed, what was once triple canopy jungle has been reduced to invasive grasses and shrubs. Scientists estimate the dioxin will remain in the soil for 400 to 500 years.
So if we go across, find ourselves the drainage ditch from the base, walk across and up a little, we should get it.
We started doing our dioxin research in Vietnam in 1994, which was only a couple of years after the country had opened up to the outside world. We transferred our knowledge and expertise in dioxin research in Canada on pulp mills to the situation here in Vietnam. We chose the Alloy Valley as our study area, particularly because it is a very isolated area. It's a very strategic location on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was very heavily bombed and sprayed repeatedly with Agent Orange throughout the American War.
Okay, so I'm just probing for a location that has no resistance. So when we take a sample, we're not going to hit anything dangerous. This area was bombed, and perhaps there's bombies or unexploded ordnance here. The main threat that we're concerned about is mines. They have an immediate reaction if you step on them.
There we go. Following our surveys, we nailed it down that dioxins were especially prevalent in very high concentrations around the former Asso military base, and it was especially found in high concentrations in the soils as well as in the duck fat and fish fat. The levels we're finding in people here in Alloway are amongst the highest in the world. We've also shown through some preliminary studies that the rates of birth defects here are higher than in other areas of Vietnam. You're seeing long-term impacts of Agent Orange and dioxin through many generations, I guess for a couple of reasons. One is genetics passing from soldiers and people who are exposed, passing it on to their children. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, is you're also seeing continual exposure in the environment to this day. The cultivation of the fields in these highly contaminated areas, it wakes up the dioxin that's buried in the soils. This has then now made it readily available to the people. It's entering their bodies, and then they are passing the dioxin to their children just through the genes or also through the breast milk. The only real means of removing dioxins from the soil is through burning or incineration. It would cost billions of dollars. What can be done, and what we have been doing here is trying to educate people through awareness programs, trying to teach the residents how to avoid contamination. We've clearly demonstrated that 35 years following the spraying in Vietnam, it's still an issue. It's not a historical issue. It's an issue that's still affecting people to this day. What we haven't been able to demonstrate is the direct linkage between Agent Orange concentrations in people and birth defects. The U.S. is currently negotiating with the Vietnamese to this end, but these negotiations will take years to be completed.
Dạ có ạ, bố cháu đi bộ đội từ năm 68 ạ, chính là ở trong chiến trường là 6 năm. Sau khi về một thời gian thì bố cháu cũng sống bình thường như người dân thôi. Thì đến sinh được 2 cháu đầu thì đến cháu thứ 4, thứ 3 là bắt đầu bị trường hợp như thế này ạ. Rồi vừa rồi đến tháng vừa rồi này ở tỉnh mới đưa đi xét nghiệm thì sức khỏe là giảm, không có khả năng lao động nữa rồi ạ.
Không bị sốt.
Không bị sốt à?
Chỉ ho không.
Thôi thì
sau thời gian về chỉ có thấy là nó ngứa, tự nhiên ngứa, còn đau đầu, cái đau thần kinh bây giờ suốt bây giờ đấy, nó kiểu nó nóng hết ngoài da là có cái hiện tượng. Rồi các cái đốt tai là ngách ngang. Tôi có 4 cháu, thế nhưng mà bị 3 đứa bị ảnh hưởng, một đứa mất.
Họ giải chất độc cháu cảm thấy nghĩ là buồn ạ, buồn vì bọn cháu bị bệnh ạ.
my case in 74, and I suddenly got this huge rash. I got delirious. My feel was like 105. The bottom line was, we don't know what it is, but something's killing your immune system. So that was the first inkling that I had been exposed to Agent Orange.
George is definitely one of the bravest person I've ever met. I don't know if I would be in his situation whether I would even manage to make it through one single day. The effects of Agent Orange are that his immune system doesn't work anymore, so he gets every infection that's flying around, which is really difficult because both of his heart attacks happened during an infection.
I'm great.
Good.
George's anti-war activities made him ineligible for veterans benefits until 1998. After his first heart attack in 1987, he and his new family decided to live in Germany, where he could receive the medical care he needed.
George also, as a late consequence of all the poison in his body, has constant pain, especially in the joints. We also know that a third heart attack is very dangerous and he might not survive it, and that's a constant fear.
You don't need to be afraid. We're not gonna hurt you.
In January next year, we're gonna be having a 10-year anniversary of the German group. Our main job was basically to raise money, and we started very small, and we're still not really a large group. We do a lot of fundraising with concerts, with bake sales, with flea markets, with little actions of people.
These beautiful human beings are doing what the project is all about. Their way of sharing, caring about those who don't have what we may have.
All right, we're back.
Okay.
Not a happy subject tonight, but it.
No, but let me say that the Friendship Village, there is a happy side to it, because we have created this international community that has come together to do something, to make change in these kids' lives, and we've changed quite a few lives. There's a lot of success stories. I just got a letter. We got an update from the director of the village in April, and in the course of reporting all the recent changes, he mentioned there was another heart surgery that they had just performed that looks like, so far it looks like it was successful. So that's another person's life was changed. And we're doing all this in a spirit of friendship, reconciliation, mutual respect, learning how to work. It's not easy to work with people across cultural differences and language differences.
Sure.
I mean, sometimes I go to these international meetings, and our French partners don't speak English, and so they have their own translators. And then you have people, our German partners, generally know three languages or more, so they're pretty versed, but they don't know Vietnamese. So we have translators to translate from Vietnamese into French or German or English, and from English to French.
And things do get lost in translation.
It gets really complicated, and it's really hard work to pay attention when that's going on.
I bet it does, you know. I'm glad to see that that is being worked on. And another factor, we don't have a lot of time to discuss it much, and you may not be all knowing it, but these hot spots you're talking about, that's the other half of the equation, is to neutralize the contamination so this does not keep going. So more people don't become contaminated. Obviously, as it's passed down through generations, that's going to be a problem maybe for a long time. But these hot spots, they have to be dealt with.
Well, there are things going on. There's research going on, and there are some cleanup efforts going on. I'm not really versed in exactly what progress has been made. I knew that they were doing some work around Da Nang, around the old military base there. And I had a conversation with someone, must have been 2004 when I was over there, who told me that they were developing a way to maybe create barriers in the ground around the places where they knew that there was dioxin concentrated in the ground, so that they could keep it from spreading into the groundwater.
Because it rains a lot there, so it's gonna spread.
And it's a fat soluble chemical, not water soluble, so it can't just be washed away. But it gets into the tissues of the fatty animals like the ducks and the fish, and then people consume those, and it gets into the breast milk. So this is how it creates human health problems. And so what I do know is that there are some educational efforts going on in some of these places, like the place that was featured in this last video clip, where they're teaching people how to avoid these kinds of thing, certain. I don't know how they can avoid. I mean, maybe they get protein shipped in from other places or something. I'm not sure, or maybe they try to switch to a mainly vegetarian diet. But just like there's still unexploded ordnance over there, and half of the battle is there's cleanup efforts going on to get those little bombies eradicated, but at the same time there's always an educational component where you're teaching the residents of a certain area what to watch out for, how to avoid the dangers.
Right, and also it occurred to me that most of the Agent Orange was probably dropped out in areas that were agricultural, and you can talk to those people, but then if those things are grown and the produce is sent into the cities, then people in the cities could be becoming contaminated, and we've only got less than 50 seconds left here.
But I think because it's a fat, it's mostly resides in fat molecules. So unless you have, I think the vegetables don't. I don't think the dioxin is. I'm not a scientist, so you'll have to have somebody else on to talk about that.
Well, people can get on the internet too. That's one thing great about the internet is you got the internet. You can go on there and figure these things out by yourself, and that's what he encouraged people to do. Don't take our word for what's going on over there.
Can I say one more thing?
You got about 10 seconds.
We need volunteers. Go to our website. Send me a message. We'd love you to help us out in Portland and raise money for the Friendship Village.
Okay, what website was that now?
VietnamFriendship.org.
All right. We're down to 10 seconds. No show next week. It's going to give me some opportunity to play some of the video footage from the Hanford rally that just happened. So we'll see you next week.
Great.